Evelyn Harper tore the will apart with her bare hands. Not because she was weak, not because she was grieving. She tore it because the words written on that paper were the ugliest thing she had ever read in her life, and she had buried her husband that same morning. Her husband's lawyer sat across the table and did not flinch. He had seen worse. In this town, he had seen far worse. If you are watching this story from wherever you are, drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and stay with Evelyn until the very last word. Because what happens to this woman will change the way you see strength forever. The ground in Red Hollow, Montana was frozen so solid that the men digging Thomas Mercer's grave had to use pickaxes. Evelyn stood at the edge of that grave in her black wool coat and watched her husband's coffin descend into the earth, and she did not cry. She had spent 3 nights crying already. She had nothing left. Thomas had been a quiet man. Stubborn, sometimes cold, often impossible, but decent in ways that mattered. He had never raised a hand to her. He had never spoken her name like it was a curse. In a territory full of men who treated their wives like livestock, Thomas Mercer had treated Evelyn like a partner, and she had loved him honestly for it. Their farm outside town was not much, but it was theirs. 40 acres of hard-won land, a cattle operation that had finally started turning profit after 6 brutal years, a barn she had helped build with her own hands, board by board, nail by nail. She knew every corner of that place. She had given it the best years of her life. She thought she would grow old there. The lawyer's name was Gerald Payne. He was a thin man with ink-stained fingers and the careful, practiced expression of someone who delivered bad news for a living. He came to her house the morning after the burial, hat in hand, briefcase under his arm, and he sat down at her kitchen table and opened a folder and began to read. Evelyn stood at the window with her back to him. She could see the barn from there. She had her arms crossed and her jaw set, and she was listening. Gerald read for nearly 10 minutes. Most of what he said was ordinary. The cattle, the land, the household accounts, the equipment. All of it to Evelyn as expected. She had been Thomas's wife for 9 years. It was only right. Then Gerald stopped. He turned a page. He cleared his throat. "There is one additional condition," he said. Evelyn turned around. "The bequest is conditional upon Mrs. Evelyn Mercer entering into marriage with Mr. Silas Mercer within 60 days of the date of her husband's passing. Should she decline, or should the 60-day period elapse without the union being formalized, all property holdings and liquid assets transfer immediately and irrevocably to Silas Mercer." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the wind pushed against the window panes. "Say that again," Evelyn said. Gerald Payne looked up from the paper. He looked like a man who genuinely wished he were somewhere else. "The will requires you to marry Silas Mercer within 60 days, Mrs. Mercer. Otherwise, everything transfers to him." "That is not Thomas's handwriting," Evelyn said. "The document has been verified, and—" "That is not Thomas's handwriting." Her voice did not waver. She walked to the table and pulled the papers from Gerald's hands before he could protest, and she spread them flat, and she looked at the signature at the bottom of the last page. Thomas Mercer. Neat, deliberate, slightly tilted to the right, just like his signature. Almost exactly like his signature, but not quite. "Where was this will drawn up?" she asked. "At the office of—" "Which office?" "Silas Mercer's private attorney, a Mr. Harlan Cross out of Helena." Evelyn set the papers down. She pressed both palms flat against the table, and she breathed slow and steady, the way she breathed when she needed to think clearly, and everything inside her was screaming. "Get out of my house," she said. "Mrs. Mercer, I understand this is—" "Get out of my house, Mr. Payne, right now. Take your briefcase and your folder and your forged document and get out." Gerald Payne gathered his things with the careful efficiency of a man who had been thrown out of homes before. He paused at the door. He turned back once, and his expression was different now. Less professional, almost human. "For what it is worth," he said quietly. "I am sorry. I did not draw up that will. I was only asked to deliver it." "Then you know what it is," Evelyn said. He did not answer. He put his hat on, and he left. Evelyn stood in her kitchen alone for a long time. Then she picked up the folder from the table, and she walked to the fireplace, and she dropped it in. It caught almost immediately. The paper curled and blackened, and the words burned away, and she watched until there was nothing left but ash. It did not solve anything. She knew that. Silas Mercer would have a dozen copies, but it felt necessary. Silas Mercer was Thomas's older brother by 11 years. He was a large man, broad-shouldered with iron-gray hair, and a way of filling whatever room he entered that made other men unconsciously step back. He had built a business empire across 3 counties over 30 years, and the method he had used to build it was simple. He found what other people needed, and he made himself the only source of it. The bank in Red Hollow was his. The general store was his. Half the cattle contracts in the territory ran through his office. The sheriff, a man named Walt Briggs, had been drinking Silas's whiskey and cashing Silas's checks for longer than most people cared to remember. Thomas had never been close to his brother. He rarely spoke about Silas at all, and when he did, it was in the short, careful sentences of a man stepping around a subject he did not fully trust himself to address. Evelyn had always understood there was history there. She had never pushed. She wished now she had pushed harder. Silas came to the farm the following morning. He did not knock. He walked through the front door like he owned it, which he was apparently in the process of legally arranging. And he stood in Evelyn's front room, with his hat on and his coat still buttoned. And he looked around at everything with an expression of calm, proprietary satisfaction that Made Evelyn's skin crawl. "I heard you burned the documents," he said. "Word travels fast," Evelyn said. "In a small town it does." He moved to the fireplace and ran one finger along the mantelpiece, checking for dust. He looked at a photograph of Evelyn and Thomas on the wall. "You look younger in that picture." "What do you want, Silas?" "That is a strange question from a woman about to become my wife." "I am not going to become your wife." He turned and looked at her. His face did not change. That was the unnerving thing about Silas Mercer. He never seemed surprised or offended. He received resistance the way a mountain receives weather, with complete indifference. "You are going to become my wife," he said, "or you are going to walk away from this farm with the clothes on your back and nothing else. Those are the 2 options available to you. I want you to understand that clearly, so there is no confusion later." Thomas would not have written that will. Thomas wrote what he was advised to write. "You mean what he was forced to write?" Silas tilted his head slightly. "Be careful, Evelyn. Do not tell me to be careful in my own home. It will not be your home in 60 days if you do not cooperate." He said it mildly. He could have been discussing the weather. "I am not an unreasonable man. I am offering you security, stability, a position in this community that most women would be grateful for. You have spent 9 years building something here. All I am asking is that you allow me to share it. You are asking me to sign away everything I am. I am asking you to be practical." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. He was watching her with the patient, calculating attention of a man who was accustomed to waiting for people to understand that they had no real options. "My husband is 3 days in the ground," she said. "You came to my house the morning after his burial with a forged will and a marriage ultimatum, and you want to talk to me about being practical." "Grief is a luxury," Silas said. "You can grieve or you can plan. I am giving you the opportunity to plan." "Get off my land," he smiled. It did not reach his eyes. It never did. 60 days, Evelyn." He picked up his hat from where he had set it on the armchair. She had not even noticed him put it down, and he put it on, and he walked to the door and opened it. He paused. "Oh, and Hector and the boys will be taking the week off. I've arranged some work for them up at the North Pasture, my North Pasture. You will need to manage on your own for a while." He glanced back at her over his shoulder. "Let me know if it gets to be too much." He left. The door swung shut behind him. Evelyn stood very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then she walked to the back door and opened it and stepped onto the back porch and screamed into the cold Montana air one long, wordless sound that frightened the horses and sent a crow exploding upward from the fence post and disappeared into the gray sky. Then she went back inside and started making a list. The first person she went to see was Judge Raymond Aldous, who had known her father and had seemed over the years to be a man of basic integrity. She rode into town and sat across from him in his cluttered office and laid out everything she knew about the will. The forged signature, the timing, the lawyer from Helena, the pressure Thomas had almost certainly been under in the final weeks of his illness. Judge Aldous listened. He nodded in several places. He folded his hands on the desk and looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Evelyn," he said, "I have known Thomas Mercer and his brother for 30 years. I understand what you are saying. I hear you. But without the original document. I burned the copy he sent. There will be other copies. Without a copy in hand, and without testimony from the attorney who drew it up, Harlan Cross will not testify against Silas Mercer." "Probably not," the judge agreed. He sounded tired, old. "There is also the matter of Silas Mercer has done a great deal for this community, Evelyn. The bank, Do not." Her voice came out harder than she intended. "Do not tell me about what Silas Mercer has done for this community, while his brother's widow is sitting in your office asking for justice. Do not do that." The judge looked at his desk. "I cannot help you," he said finally. "I am sorry. I genuinely am." She went to the sheriff next. Walt Briggs was eating his lunch when she walked in, a man so deeply embedded in Silas Mercer's pocket that he had essentially become a personal employee who happened to wear a badge. He listened to her with a piece of cornbread halfway to his mouth and an expression of such elaborate theatrical neutrality that she almost laughed. "Forgery is a serious accusation," he said. "Forgery is a crime," Evelyn said. "You'd need evidence." "I need an investigation." "An investigation would take time and resources the department doesn't." She left. She did not bother with the door. 3 days later, Hector Ruiz, the farmhand who had worked for her and Thomas for 5 years, came to her privately at the edge of the property line, cap in hand, his dark eyes troubled and apologetic. He was a quiet man, a good man. "Mrs. Mercer," he said. "I'm sorry. He told us we'd be blacklisted across the whole territory if we stayed. Couldn't work anywhere in 3 counties. I got a family." "I understand, Hector. I don't want to leave you without—" "I understand," she said again more gently. "You have children. I would not ask you to risk them. Not for me." He stood there for a moment, clearly wanting to say something more. Then he reached into his coat pocket and held out a small folded piece of paper. Before Mr. Thomas went, he gave me this. Said to give it to you if things ever got bad enough. Didn't know what it meant. Still don't, I reckon." She took the paper. It was a name and an address in Helena, and below it 2 words in Thomas's handwriting. Real handwriting, crooked and slightly smudged, and unmistakably his. It said, "Trust him." The name on the paper was Rowan Cade. Evelyn was awake well past midnight when the fire started. She smelled the smoke before she saw the light, and she was out of bed and pulling her coat on before she was fully conscious. And by the time she reached the back door, the barn was already burning from the east wall, the old dry timber catching and climbing with a speed that stopped her breath cold. She ran. She pulled the barn doors open and went inside into the smoke and the heat, calling to the horses, grabbing their halters, dragging them out one at a time while the fire moved up the walls above her. The second horse, her bay gelding named Copper, was panicked and fighting her, and she was so focused on getting hold of him that she did not hear the second set of footsteps behind her. A hand closed around Copper's halter on the other side, and the horse calmed almost immediately, and she looked up through the smoke to see a man she had never seen before in her life. Tall, lean, his face covered in a bandana against the smoke, his hands sure and steady on the animal. "You got the others," he said. "2 are out. Copper's the last." "Then let's go." They brought the horse out together. The east wall of the barn came down 30 seconds later with a sound like the world cracking, and Evelyn stood in the snow with the horses and watched everything she and Thomas had built with their hands burn against the night sky, and the man she did not know stood a few feet away and watched with her and did not say a word until she was ready. "You're Evelyn Mercer," he said finally. She turned to look at him. He had pulled the bandana down. He was younger than she had expected, somewhere in his mid-30s, with a weathered face and calm, dark eyes that watched her the way a man watches something he has been thinking about for a long time. "Who are you?" she said. "Rowan Cade." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and produced a letter. Even in the firelight, she recognized the handwriting. Her chest tightened. "Thomas wrote me about 8 months ago. I've been trying to get here since before he died. Roads were bad through the pass." He held the letter out. "I'm sorry I didn't make it in time." She took the letter. She did not open it. Not yet. "What are you to Thomas? He helped me once. A long time ago when I needed it badly. I owed him." Rowan looked at the burning barn. His jaw was set. "Looks like I owe him this now too." "He set this fire," Evelyn said. "Not a question." "He or someone working for him. Yes, ma'am." He turned back to her. "You've been to the judge. You've been to the sheriff. They won't move." "No." "Then you know what the situation is." "Tell me what Thomas said in that letter." Rowan looked at her steadily. He had the eyes of a man who did not soften things unnecessarily. She respected that already, even though she did not know him yet. "He said Silas has been planning this for years," Rowan said. "He said there was a second deed on this property that Silas had drawn up without Thomas's knowledge, and that Silas had been waiting for Thomas to die to use it. He said the will was part of it, that Silas's lawyer had been after Thomas for 2 years to change the terms, and that Thomas had resisted until he was too sick to fight anymore. He said—" Rowan paused. He said the next part carefully, like a man who understood the weight of the words. "He said Silas told him if he didn't cooperate, he'd make sure Evelyn had nothing to come back to, and that Thomas by the end was afraid for you, afraid enough to sign." The fire crackled. One of the horses shifted and breathed. "He left you something," Rowan continued. "Money and documents, evidence, things that might hold up in a court outside Silas Mercer's reach in front of a judge Silas doesn't own. Not here, not in Montana, but somewhere." He held her gaze. "He sent it ahead to a woman in Helena, someone he trusted. It's waiting for you there." Evelyn was quiet for a long time. She was looking at the fire, but she was not really seeing it. She was thinking about Thomas, in those last weeks, thin and pale, and unable to sit up for long, his hands shaking on the blankets. She had thought he was afraid of dying. She had not understood that he was afraid of what came after. "What do you get out of this?" she asked. "I told you, I owe him." "Thomas is dead. Debts don't die with the people you owe them to," Rowan said. "They just change shape." She looked at him. He was standing easy in the snow, hands relaxed at his sides, no urgency in his posture, as if he had all the time in the world and was entirely prepared to wait for whatever she decided. "You came all this way," she said. "Through the pass in winter." "Yes, ma'am." "Just because he asked you?" "He didn't just ask me," Rowan said. "He trusted me. That's a different thing." Evelyn opened the letter. She read it in the firelight, standing in the snow. And by the time she reached the last line, she understood that her husband had known he was going to lose, and that he had spent the last months of his life trying to make sure she did not lose with him. She folded the letter carefully and put it inside her coat. "If I stay," she said, "what happens?" "What?" "He wears you down. He cuts off everything you depend on one piece at a time until 60 days pass and his lawyer files the marriage deed and it becomes legal. If you try to fight it after that, you're fighting with no money, no allies, and no documents. And this is his territory. And if I go, it won't be easy or safe," Rowan said. He was not trying to make it sound better than it was. "But at least it's your choice. And you'd have what Thomas left you. And the things Silas doesn't know Thomas had." Evelyn looked up at the sky. It was deep black above the smoke, sharp with cold stars. Red Hollow was silent around her. Every house dark. Every neighbor asleep or pretending to be. Not one of them had come out when her barn caught fire. Not one. There is no choice to make, she said. There never was. Rowan nodded slowly. I can have horses ready by dawn. Not dawn, Evelyn said. Tonight, before anyone comes to see what happened to the barn. She turned toward the house. Give me 20 minutes. She went inside, and she did not look back at the fire. She pulled her travel bag from under the bed, and she packed the things she needed: clothes, the money she had hidden in the floorboard under the kitchen table for emergencies, her mother's ring, and the small leather book where she kept the farm accounts. Every number from the past 6 years, every transaction, every debt that Silas had quietly leveraged against Thomas over the years. Evidence, if she could find someone willing to read it. She stood in the doorway of the house one last time. She looked at the kitchen where she had made 1,000 breakfasts, the chair where Thomas used to sit with his coffee and his silence, the photograph on the wall that Silas had looked at with such cold satisfaction. She thought about leaving the photograph. She took it anyway. Then she walked out, and she pulled the door shut behind her, and she went to where Rowan Cade was waiting with the horses, and the burning barn lit the road ahead of them in flickering orange as they rode out of Red Hollow into the dark, and not one soul in that town lifted a curtain to watch them go. They rode through the night without stopping. Rowan set the pace steady, not reckless, the kind of rhythm that covered ground without burning the horses. Evelyn kept up without complaint. She had ridden these roads in worse weather and darker moods, and she had learned long ago that panic wasted energy better spent on thinking. The cold hit hard once the fire was out of sight. She pulled her coat tighter and said nothing. An hour out of Red Hollow, Rowan slowed and glanced back over his shoulder. "Anyone following?" she asked. "Not yet." He turned forward again. "Won't take Silas long to figure out you're gone. He'll have someone watching the farm. Then we don't stop until we're past the county line." Agreed. They crossed the county line sometime before dawn, where the road narrowed to a trail between 2 ridges of frozen pine. Rowan knew a ranch house there belonging to a woman named Nell Pryor, who asked no questions and charged $2 for a warm place to sleep and feed for the horses. Evelyn paid without hesitation. She had exactly $63.40 in the floorboard money. She had counted it 3 times while packing. Nell Pryor brought them coffee without being asked, and looked at Evelyn with the particular understanding of a woman who had seen other women arrive at her door in the middle of the night, with a bag and a set jaw and no explanation. "You eat?" Nell asked. "No," Evelyn admitted. Nell put bread and cold chicken on the table and went back to her room and closed the door. Evelyn and Rowan ate in silence for a few minutes. Then she put down the bread and opened Thomas's letter again and read it through a second time, slower now, with coffee warming her hands. When she finished, she folded it and looked up. "He says you were a lawman once," she said. Rowan poured more coffee. "For a while." "What happened?" "Wrong man got shot," he said simply. "Right man walked free. I quit." He set the pot down. "Thomas helped me understand I wasn't responsible for a broken system. Took me about 2 years to halfway believe him." Evelyn watched him. "He was good at that, finding the useful truth." "Yes, ma'am, he was." She pushed the letter across the table toward him. "He says Silas has a second deed, a fraudulent one drawn up by Harlan Cross out of Helena, backdated 3 years. He says you'll know how to read it." Rowan picked up the letter and found the passage. His eyes moved quickly. He had the focused stillness of a man trained to absorb information fast. "If this is what Thomas believed it was," he said, "then the deed exists on paper, but the notarization date won't match the territorial records. It's forgeable but not airtight. A real court, not Aldous. Someone outside Silas's reach, a real court, could invalidate it." He set the letter down. "If we can get to Helena and get the documents Thomas left with." He checked the letter again. "A woman named Margaret Holt. She has everything." "Margaret Holt," Evelyn repeated. She had never heard the name. Thomas had kept more secrets than she had known. She was not angry about it anymore. She understood now why he had. 3 days' ride, Rowan said. Maybe 4 if the northern pass is still iced over. Then we leave in 2 hours, Evelyn said. Let the horses rest. Then we go. They almost made it out of Nell Pryor's yard without incident. The rider came up the south road just as Rowan was tightening the saddle on his gray horse. Evelyn saw him first, a young man she recognized, Pete Dawes, one of Sheriff Briggs's deputies, barely 20 years old, riding hard and looking like he had not slept. He pulled up short when he saw her, and his face went through 3 expressions in rapid succession: surprise, relief, and then the careful blankness of someone trying to remember what he was supposed to do. "Mrs. Mercer," he said. "Pete," she said. "The sheriff's looking for you, ma'am. Says there's an investigation about the fire." "Is that right?" "Yes, ma'am. Says there's reason to believe you may have that the fire may have been—" He stopped. He looked miserable. He was young enough to still feel the gap between what he was told to say and what he could see with his own eyes. "Ma'am, I'm supposed to ask you to come back to town." "And if I don't?" Pete Dawes looked at Rowan, then back at Evelyn. Then he looked at his saddle horn for a long moment. "I reckon," he said carefully, "that I didn't see anything when I rode past here, on account of it being so dark and all." He looked up. His jaw was tight. "You understand me, Mrs. Mercer?" Evelyn understood him perfectly. "You're a decent young man, Pete Dawes." "Don't tell the sheriff that," he said, and turned his horse and rode back the way he came. They were moving again within the hour. The road to Helena ran northeast through some of the hardest terrain in the territory, and in late winter it was no kind of road at all, in places more of a suggestion, a direction the land was willing to tolerate. Travelers moving in provided they asked it politely. Rowan knew the route. He navigated by instinct and the occasional landmark he had memorized from previous crossings, and he kept them off the main stage road wherever possible. "Silas will put out notices," he told her on the second day as they stopped to water the horses at a creek that had not yet fully frozen at the center. "Maybe wanted posters. He'll call it theft. Say you took money from the estate." "He will," Evelyn said. "He'll have cross-draft the paperwork today if he hasn't already. It means we can't ride openly through any town that does business with him." "That is most of northern Montana." "It is," Rowan said. He looked at the water moving under the ice at the creek's center. "You scared?" She considered the question honestly. "I've been afraid since the moment Gerald Payne sat down at my kitchen table," she said. "I don't think it helps to pretend otherwise." "No," Rowan agreed. "It doesn't." "Are you—" He looked at her. Something shifted slightly in his expression. "I've done harder things," he said. "Not many, but some." They made camp that night in the shelter of a rock outcropping where the wind couldn't reach them directly. Evelyn took first watch and sat with her back against the stone and Thomas's leather account book open on her knee. She read through it by the light of a very small fire, small enough to be invisible from the road Rowan had specified, and the further she read the colder she felt, in ways that had nothing to do with the temperature. The numbers told a story. Over the past 4 years, Silas Mercer had extended credit to Thomas's cattle operation through the Red Hollow Bank credit that looked on the surface like reasonable business terms. But Evelyn had kept these books herself. She knew every transaction, and looking at the dates, looking at the interest calculations, looking at the timing of certain deals that had gone wrong in ways that had always seemed like bad luck, she began to see the shape of it. The credit had been extended in a way that made the farm dependent on it. Then slowly, systematically, the terms had shifted. Interest had been called early. Supply contracts had fallen through not by accident, she now realized, but because Silas had been quietly pressuring the other parties to withdraw. The farm had been weakened deliberately over years, so that by the time Thomas was sick and dying, it needed Silas to survive. It had never been about the farm. It had never even really been about her. Silas Mercer had spent 4 years engineering a situation in which a dead Thomas Mercer would leave Evelyn with no real options, so that the forced marriage would look to an outside observer like a widow making a practical choice. He had been patient. He had been thorough, and he had almost gotten away with it. She closed the account book and sat with the knowledge for a while. The fire burned down. The horses breathed steadily in the dark. Somewhere on the slope above her, an owl called once and went silent. When Rowan woke for his watch, she told him what she had found. He sat with his coffee and listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The account book," he said. "Would it hold up?" "If someone who knew cattle finance looked at it, yes. The pattern is clear. The timing is too precise to be coincidence." She paused. "But Silas will say Thomas was a bad businessman." "Thomas was one of the best stockmen in the territory," Rowan said flatly. "Silas will say otherwise. And Silas controls the narrative in 3 counties. Then we need somewhere he doesn't control the narrative." Rowan set down the cup. "Margaret Holt. Thomas said she had documents, letters maybe, correspondence between Silas and Cross. If she has that, if Thomas kept copies, then the account book corroborates it." Evelyn finished. Rowan looked at her across the small fire. "You understand law," he said. Not a question. Almost surprised. "I understand numbers," she said. "Numbers and law are not so different. Both tell stories. Both can be read in more than one way depending on who's doing the reading and what they've been paid to find." He was quiet for a moment. "Thomas told me you ran the books for the farm." "Thomas ran the cattle. I ran everything else." "I'm beginning to understand," Rowan said, "why Silas wants you married and controlled before you have a chance to think clearly." It was not a compliment exactly. It was something more useful than a compliment. It was recognition. Evelyn stored it away and did not say anything more. They reached the outskirts of a town called Millhaven on the afternoon of the 3rd day, and that was where they found the posters. Rowan spotted them first nailed to the post outside the livery stable, then again on the wall of the general store, then on the notice board outside the town hall. He pulled up short, and Evelyn came up beside him and read the words over his shoulder. "Wanted for questioning. Evelyn Mercer, widow of Red Hollow, Montana. Suspected of theft from the estate of Thomas Mercer. Reward $200. $200. In Millhaven, that was 2 months' wages for a working man. The poster had a description. Brown hair, medium height, gray eyes, and it had Silas Mercer's name printed at the bottom as the issuing party. It did not say sheriff. It did not say judge. It said Silas Mercer as if Silas Mercer were indistinguishable from the law itself, which in this part of the territory he largely was. "We need to keep moving," Rowan said quietly. But there was a man outside the livery stable looking at them. An older man, heavy-set, with a deputy's badge on his coat that caught the light. He was not moving. He was just looking. "Don't run," Rowan said under his breath. "Running confirms it." "I know that," Evelyn said, her voice perfectly level. They walked the horses forward at the same steady pace. The deputy watched them. His hand did not go to his gun. He just watched with the slow, deliberate attention of a man memorizing faces. They were halfway through the main street when a woman came out of the dressmaker's shop on the left and stopped dead on the boardwalk. "Evelyn Harper," the woman said. Evelyn turned her head. The name landed like a stone, her maiden name, the name she had used before Thomas, the name almost no one in Montana knew her by. The woman was perhaps 60, with white hair pinned sharply, and the straight-backed carriage of someone who had spent a lifetime refusing to let anything diminish her. She was looking at Evelyn with an expression of sharp, immediate intelligence. "I was Harper," Evelyn said carefully. "Before I was Mercer." "I know who you were," the woman said. She glanced at the deputy down the street. Something decided itself in her face. "Get your horses off the street and come in through the back. Now please, before Hendricks finishes counting what's on that poster." Rowan and Evelyn exchanged a glance. There was no good option, and one less bad one, and they both knew it. They moved. Her name was Catherine Reeves. She owned the dressmaking shop and half the dry goods business in Millhaven, and she had known Evelyn's mother 30 years ago in Missouri, before either of them had come west. She put a kettle on and talked while it boiled, and did not waste a single word. I've seen 3 of those posters in the last 2 days, Catherine said. Ryder came through on Monday, said he was from Red Hollow, said a widow had stolen from her husband's estate, and Silas Mercer was offering a reward. She looked at Evelyn directly. I've known the Mercer name for 20 years, and I have never once heard of a Mercer widow stealing so much as a teaspoon. But I have heard what Silas Mercer does to people who get between him and something he wants. Then you know the situation, Evelyn said. I know enough, Catherine said. She poured the tea. Where are you headed? Helena, Rowan said. Who are you seeing there? A beat of silence. Rowan looked at Evelyn. She made the call. A woman named Margaret Holt. Catherine Reeves set her cup down very slowly. Her expression shifted. She looked at Evelyn with something that was no longer just interest. Margaret Holt, Catherine repeated, was the one who helped my daughter leave a bad marriage 3 years ago. She runs a legal aid office out of her hat shop on Commerce Street. She was quiet for a moment. Thomas Mercer sent you to Margaret Holt. Yes, Evelyn said. Then Thomas Mercer, Catherine said carefully, was a smarter man than I gave him credit for. They stayed 2 hours. Catherine fed them, gave them a change of outer clothes to confuse the description on the posters, and sent them out through the back alley with directions that avoided the main stage road by cutting through privately held ranch land, whose owners she personally knew would not stop them. At the back door, she caught Evelyn's arm. Margaret will help you, she said. Whatever Thomas left with her, she'll know what to do with it. She's been building cases against men like Silas Mercer for 15 years. Her grip was firm. Her eyes were direct. You are not the first woman he has tried to trap. You understand. You are not the first. But you might be the one who ends it. Evelyn stood in the cold of the alley and looked at this woman she had not known 2 hours ago, and something loosened slightly in her chest. Not hope, not yet. But the first hint of it. The first understanding that she was not as alone as she had believed since the morning Gerald Payne sat down at her kitchen table. Thank you, Evelyn said. Don't thank me, Catherine said. Get to Helena. They rode out through the back roads as the light was failing, Millhaven disappearing behind them. Helena still a day ahead. The horses moved through the dusk at a steady trot, and Evelyn kept thinking about what Catherine had said. You are not the first. She had known that in her mind abstractly, the way you know that suffering is not unique to you. But hearing it said plainly by a woman who had seen it, who had helped another woman escape it, that was different. That was the difference between knowing a thing and feeling it become real. She was still turning it over when Rowan said without looking at her, You're quiet. Thinking? She said. About Helena. About what comes after Helena, she said. About what Thomas actually put in those documents. About whether any of it will be enough. Rowan rode a few strides in silence. Then he said, Thomas wouldn't have spent his last strength sending you to Margaret Holt if it wasn't enough. You don't know that. No, he agreed. But I knew Thomas, and he wasn't a man who did things halfway. He paused. Even at the end, Evelyn rode on and said nothing. The first stars were showing now, hard and cold and very bright. The road ahead disappeared into the dark, and the dark was full of things she could not yet see, and she was afraid still the way she had been afraid since the beginning. But she was moving. She was choosing the direction, and for a woman who had spent 3 days being told she had no choices, that was everything. They reached Helena just before noon the following day, cold to the bone and road-worn in ways that went deeper than tired. Margaret Holt's hat shop sat on Commerce Street between a printer and a land office, the kind of modest establishment that advertised nothing unusual about itself. There was a small painted sign in the window, M. Holt Millinery and Alterations, and a bell above the door that rang when they pushed it open. The woman behind the counter looked up immediately. She was perhaps 55 with sharp gray eyes and the organized stillness of someone who had spent decades learning to read people quickly. She looked at Evelyn, then at Rowan, then back at Evelyn. Thomas Mercer's wife, she said. Not a question. His widow, Evelyn said. Margaret Holt came around the counter without another word and locked the front door and turned the sign to closed. "How far behind you are they?" "We don't know," Rowan said. "We came through Millhaven 2 days ago. They had posters up." "They have posters up in Helena too," Margaret said. "Since yesterday morning." She was already moving toward the back of the shop. "Come." The back room was not what the front suggested. Behind the bolts of fabric and the display forms was a second room, smaller, with a locked cabinet against the far wall. Margaret produced a key from inside her collar and opened it, and inside were papers. Bundles of them organized and labeled in a hand Evelyn recognized immediately as Thomas's. "He sent these over 4 months," Margaret said, "a few pages at a time in letters that looked like ordinary correspondence to anyone reading them. He was careful." She paused. "He was more afraid than he let on. You understand that?" "I'm beginning to," Evelyn said. Margaret laid the documents on the table. 3 things. The first is a sworn statement Thomas had notarized privately in November by a notary in Butte who has no connection to Silas Mercer. In it, Thomas details the pressure campaign Silas used to alter the will. Names, dates, specific conversations. She set it down. The second is a copy of correspondence between Silas Mercer and Harlan Cross dating back 2 years. Thomas obtained it from Cross's office himself during a meeting Cross didn't know he was watching carefully. Evelyn leaned forward. The letters were in Silas's handwriting. She had seen that handwriting on farm documents, on bank notices, on the margin notes of contracts Thomas had brought home over the years. She would know it anywhere. She read the first paragraph of the top letter, and her jaw tightened so hard it ached. The widow must have no viable alternative by the time the estate is settled. Ensure the credit terms are called early. The supply contracts with Rollins and Cole can be allowed to lapse. I have spoken to both men. By spring, the operation will be dependent on our goodwill for survival, and she will understand that marriage is the only rational outcome. He wrote it down, she said, quietly, almost to herself. Arrogant men often do, Margaret said. They write things down because they believe they will never be called to account for them. She set the third document on top. This is the fraudulent deed drawn up by Cross. Thomas managed to obtain a copy through a clerk in Cross's office, a young woman who had her own reasons to dislike Silas Mercer. Compare it to the Territorial Land Registry. She produced a second document alongside it. The notarization date on Cross's deed is 2 weeks before the Territorial Registry shows the original deed was ever filed. It is physically impossible for the fraudulent document to predate the one it claims to supersede. Any competent court can see it. Rowan had picked up the registry document. He was reading fast, his finger moving down the columns. "She's right," he said. "This falls apart the moment a judge compares the 2 dates." "There is a federal circuit judge coming through Helena in 3 weeks, Margaret said. "Judge Arthur Pell. He is not Silas Mercer's man. He is not anyone's man particularly. He is just a competent and irritable federal judge who does not like having his time wasted with fraudulent land filings." She looked at Evelyn. "With these documents and your account book, Thomas told me about the account book you have a case. Not a certain case, but a real one." Evelyn straightened. Something was moving through her that she could not name precisely. It was not relief, not yet. It was more like the feeling of ground firming up beneath feet that had been walking on ice for days. "We need to stay out of sight until Pell arrives," Rowan said. "I have a boarding house," Margaret said. 3 streets over. Women only officially. But I have a room in the back that has housed men in difficult situations before. You will not be the first." It was the closest thing to safe they had felt in 5 days. Evelyn allowed herself approximately 30 seconds to feel it. Then the bell above the front door rang. All 3 of them froze. The door was locked. Evelyn had watched Margaret turn the key herself. But someone was pushing against it, not hard, not yet, but persistent testing. "Back door," Margaret said, already moving. They were through the back room and into the alley before whoever was at the front door managed to look through the window and see the empty shop. Rowan had both horses untied from the side post before Evelyn had the documents folded into her coat. "Did you see who it was?" she asked. 2 men, Rowan said. I didn't recognize them, but the one on the left had a red hollow brand on his saddlebag. He was already up. They're not Law. They're Silas's people. He got here faster than we thought, Evelyn said. He sent riders ahead, Rowan said. Probably the night you left. He knew where you'd have to go. The realization hit her cold and hard. Silas had known about Margaret Holt. He had known about Thomas's connections in Helena. He had sent men ahead precisely because he had anticipated this, had understood that Thomas might have left something behind and had moved to cut it off. He knew, Evelyn said. He's known the whole time. Then we don't go to Margaret's boarding house, Rowan said. He'll have that covered too. Then where? He thought for exactly 3 seconds. I know someone. A man named Cal Briggs, no relation to the sheriff. He runs a freighting operation on the south end of town. He owes me a considerable favor from 2 years back, and he doesn't ask questions. Can you trust him? Yes. Then go. Cal Briggs was a short, barrel-chested man with a beard that had gone entirely white, and the slow, deliberate movements of someone who had learned patience the hard way. He opened his freighting warehouse door, looked at Rowan, said, I figured you'd turn up eventually, and stood back to let them in. He asked no questions. He gave them a corner behind a stack of freight crates, 2 blankets, and a bucket of water. He went back to work loading his wagons as if they did not exist. They stayed still and listened to Helena going about its business outside the walls. An hour passed, then another. Rowan sat with his back against the crates and his arms on his knees, and Evelyn sat opposite him with the documents spread carefully on her lap, reading and rereading, memorizing the structure of the case, the way she had always memorized account figures, not just the numbers, but the pattern beneath them. You know what you're going to say, Rowan said. It wasn't a question. I know what the documents say, she answered. Whether Pell will listen is a different matter. He'll listen. Margaret was right about him. Margaret has never been the one sitting across from a federal judge while Silas Mercer's lawyers file countermotions and character assessments. She looked up. They will say I am a grief-addled widow who doesn't understand her husband's business dealings. They will say I was manipulated by a former lawman with a grudge. They will say, they can say whatever they like, Rowan said quietly. The notarization date doesn't care what they say. The dates don't move because a lawyer talks fast. She looked at him for a moment. You're very calm. One of us has to be, he said, and there was something in his voice that was almost gentle. Outside, the sounds shifted. Horses, more than 2, moving with the organized, deliberate purpose of men covering a grid. Rowan was on his feet before Evelyn had fully registered the change. He moved to the wall and pressed his eye to a gap in the boards. His entire body went still, in a way she had come to recognize. It was the stillness of a man seeing something he had hoped not to see. How many? She asked. 5 riders, and Silas Mercer is with them. The air left the room. She had not thought Silas would come himself. She had thought he would send men lawyers deputies. She had not understood until this moment what this was to him. This was not about property. This was not even about control, not entirely. This was personal in the way that only wounded pride in an arrogant man could be personal. She had defied him, run from him, and he had come himself to close that door. Cal. Rowan said, his voice low and even. Cal Briggs appeared from between 2 freight stacks. He had clearly heard. Back of the building, Cal said. There's a door that opens into the tannery next door. Owner's name is Hess. Tell him I sent you. He'll put you in the loft. They'll search every building on the street, Evelyn said. They'll try, Cal said. Half this block belongs to people who don't much care for outside interference in their operations. It'll slow them down. He looked at Rowan. Get her out of Helena tonight, son. Don't wait on the judge. We can't leave, Evelyn said. The documents. The documents are no good to you if Silas gets his hands on them, Rowan said. They're no good to anyone if I'm not here to present them. Evelyn? His voice was quiet, but it stopped her. She looked at him. Margaret has copies of the sworn statement. She kept a copy of everything. If something happens to you, the case dies. If the documents are lost, but you're alive, and Margaret is alive, there's still a case. He held her gaze. You are not the document. You are the witness. Do you understand the difference? She did. She did not like it. But she understood it. They went through the tannery door. Hess was a taciturn German, who nodded once at Cal's name and pointed wordlessly at the ladder to the loft. They climbed it and pulled the ladder up after them and sat in the dark above the smell of curing leather and listened to the town below them tighten like a fist. They heard Silas's voice once outside through the wall. Even muffled by the distance and the wood, it was recognizable. That measured, implacable tone that expected compliance the way weather expected to be felt. I know she came to this street, Silas said. I know she spoke to Margaret Holt. I want a name. Anyone in this building who gives me a useful name will find a $20 bill on their doorstep by morning. Silence from whoever he was speaking to. 50, Silas said. Final offer. More silence. Then footsteps moving away. Evelyn sat in the dark with her knees pulled to her chest and the documents held against her ribs inside her coat, and she thought about Thomas. She thought about the fact that in the last months of his life, while he was losing ground daily, he had been doing this, writing letters, securing copies, building the foundation of a case he knew he would never live to see argued. He had done it for her. He had used the last of what he had to give her a fighting chance. She was not going to waste it. We can't wait 3 weeks for Pell, she said into the dark. No, Rowan agreed. Then we need someone who can get word to Pell, or to a federal office that can contact him. Someone Silas can't block or buy. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Catherine Reeves, back in Millhaven. Evelyn turned her head. She couldn't see him in the dark, but she could hear him thinking. She said she'd helped women before, Rowan said. She knew Margaret Holt's name. She knows this territory. If she has connections to a federal circuit, she runs half the dry goods business in Millhaven. Evelyn said slowly. That kind of operation, you need relationships with federal supply contracts, stage lines, territorial offices. She knows people, Rowan said. The right kind of people. And she already knows what Silas is. It was the best option they had. It was also going to require getting out of Helena without being seen riding back toward Millhaven, which was behind them and closer to Red Hollow than Evelyn wanted to think about, and doing all of it while Silas Mercer and 5 riders were actively searching the block below them. Can you get us out of the city tonight? She asked. Not both of us on horseback, Rowan said. The roads will be watched, but Cal runs a freight wagon south every night. Commercial cargo routine run, nobody searches it twice. A pause. It won't be comfortable. I have not been comfortable in 6 days, Evelyn said. One more night won't matter. What neither of them had anticipated was that Silas had put a man on Cal's wagon. Not visibly, not a rider alongside it, but a man inside it. A man who had climbed into the back of the freight wagon while Cal was distracted by a conversation at the loading dock, and who had been lying very still between 2 crates of dry goods for approximately 2 hours. Rowan found him 15 minutes outside Helena when the wagon hit a rut that shifted the cargo, and the man's boot scraped against the board floor with a sound that was too deliberate to be accidental. Evelyn heard Rowan move in the dark, and then heard a single sharp sound of impact, and then silence. He's not dead, Rowan said, breathing slightly harder than usual. Just resting. He'll be found when the wagon arrives. He'll be found in about 4 hours, Rowan agreed, which is enough time to do what we need to do. He saw our faces, Evelyn said. He saw our faces before I knocked him unconscious. So Silas already knows we were in the wagon, which means he already knows our direction. A short silence. We have to move faster than we planned. They went over the side of the wagon at the next road junction and took to the dark on foot, moving parallel to the road, but not on it. And Evelyn ran in the cold Montana dark with Thomas's documents against her heart and the sound of her own breathing loud in her ears, and she did not stop. She did not stop because she could not afford to, because somewhere behind her, Silas Mercer had just realized he had been one step behind her for days, and men like Silas Mercer did not accept being a step behind with patience or grace. He would not send riders now. He would come himself. And the road to Millhaven was still 30 miles long. They walked through the dark for 2 hours, before a farm wagon heading south picked them up without being asked. The driver, a weathered old man, who took one look at them and said only, "I don't want to know," and told them to get in the back. Evelyn was grateful in ways she could not articulate. Her feet were soaked through, her coat was doing less work than it should have been, and the documents were still pressed against her ribs, which was the only thing that mattered. She and Rowan rode in the back of that wagon in silence, and she thought about the 30 miles between them and Millhaven, and she thought about Silas's man in Cal's wagon waking up with a headache, and Silas learning exactly which road they were on, and she thought about Catherine Reeves's straight spine and sharp eyes, and the way she had said, "You might be the one who ends it," as if she had been waiting years to say it to someone. The old farmer dropped them at a crossroads, 6 miles from Millhaven just before first light, and drove on without looking back, and they walked the rest of the way in the gray pre-dawn cold, moving fast, not talking. Catherine Reeves answered the back door of her shop on the second knock. She looked at them both and said, "I've been expecting you since yesterday," and stood aside to let them in. "Silas is behind us," Rowan said. "I know. One of his riders came through Millhaven last night talking openly at the saloon. He wasn't being subtle." She put the kettle on. Her hands were steady. "He told 3 different men that Evelyn Mercer had stolen $50,000 from Thomas's estate and was traveling with a known criminal." 50,000, Evelyn said flatly. "Numbers get larger when pride gets smaller," Catherine said. "Sit down, both of you." Evelyn sat. Rowan stayed standing near the door, which she understood without comment. "We need a connection to Judge Pell," Evelyn said. "Federal Circuit. He's due in Helena in 3 weeks, but we can't wait." "Arthur Pell," Catherine said without blinking. "You know him. His wife and I have corresponded for 11 years. We share an interest in the establishment of women's property rights in territorial law." Catherine poured the water. "Last month she wrote to tell me Arthur would be coming through this region 6 days ahead of schedule. A land fraud case in Billings was settled early. He has time on his hands." She set the cups down. "He arrives in Helena day after tomorrow." The air in the room shifted. Evelyn looked at Catherine for a long moment. "You've been building toward this," she said. "This isn't the first time you've done this." "No," Catherine said simply. "It is not, but it may be the most important time." "I need to get back to Helena," Evelyn said. "I need to be in front of Pell with these documents before Silas can file counterclaims or buy his way into the proceeding." "Yes," Catherine said, "which means you need to leave within the hour before Silas's riders realize you doubled back." She reached under the counter and produced a folded paper. "I wrote this last night on the chance you would come. It is a letter of introduction for Judge Pell from me describing the nature of the case and the character of the parties involved. It carries some weight. Arthur knows I do not write letters for the purpose of wasting his time." She held it out. "Take it." Evelyn took it. Her hand was steadier than she felt. "What about you?" Rowan asked. "If Silas traces this back to you—" "Let him try," Catherine said, and her voice had an edge in it like good steel. "I have operated in this territory for 22 years. I have contracts with the Territorial Supply Office, a working relationship with 2 federal land agents, and enough documentation of my own regarding Silas Mercer's business practices to make his lawyers very uncomfortable." She looked at Rowan directly. "He can try. I've been waiting." They were saddled and moving within 40 minutes. 2 fresh horses from Catherine's stable that were faster than what they had been riding, and the letter tucked inside Evelyn's coat alongside the documents, and the morning still gray and cold, and not yet fully awake. They made 10 miles before the riders found them. There were 4 of them coming up from the south on the main road, and they moved with the organized deliberateness of men who had been told exactly where to look. The one in front was not one of Silas's regular hands. He was a harder-faced man with a bounty hunter's eyes, the kind that catalogued what he saw without emotion, priced it, and moved. "Evelyn Mercer," the man said. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not need to. The other three riders had fanned out in a loose arc that covered any direction she might think about running. "Mr. Mercer would like you to come back to Red Hollow with us. Peaceable if possible." "And if not peaceable," Rowan said. The man looked at him. "You're not on the poster, friend. Walk away, and this isn't your problem." "It became my problem when someone set fire to her barn," Rowan said. His voice was even, conversational, the tone of a man who had been in worse situations and was measuring this one carefully. "You want to tell me whose idea that was?" The bounty hunter said nothing. "Didn't think so," Rowan said. "Ma'am?" The man turned back to Evelyn. "I'm getting paid either way. The money's the same whether you come quiet or not. But the ride is a lot more comfortable if nobody has to be uncomfortable about it." Evelyn looked at the arc of riders. She looked at the road behind her and the road ahead. She looked at Rowan, and Rowan looked back at her, and in the space of that glance, they communicated something that had no words, but was completely clear. "All right," she said. Rowan's head turned slightly. "Evelyn?" "All right," she said again more firmly, and this time she was looking at him, and her eyes said "trust me" in the same direct way Thomas had used those words in his letter. She reached inside her coat and took out the documents, all of them, the sworn statement and the letters and the fraudulent deed and Catherine's letter of introduction, and she held them out to Rowan without breaking eye contact with him. He understood immediately. His expression didn't change. He took the documents and slid them into his own coat in one motion. The bounty hunter watched this exchange. "Whatever you just gave him," he said carefully, "I'll need to take it back." "You can try," Rowan said. The man considered his options. He had 4 riders and a clear bounty on Evelyn Mercer. He did not have a clear bounty on Rowan Cade, and the way Rowan was sitting in that saddle told a particular story to anyone who knew how to read it, the story of a man who had been in worse situations than this one, and had walked out of all of them. "The woman comes with us," the bounty hunter decided. "The man rides away. That's the deal." "That's not a deal," Rowan said. "That's a threat. Call it what you like." Evelyn put her hand on Rowan's arm. Her grip was firm and deliberate. "Go," she said quietly. "Get to Helena. Get to Pell. 2 days." She held his gaze. 2 days, Rowan." He looked at her for 3 long seconds. His jaw was set so hard she could see the muscle working. 2 days, he said. "I will be there." He looked at the bounty hunter one last time, a look that communicated something short and unmistakable. And then he turned his horse and rode north, and Evelyn watched him go until the riders closed in around her and she could no longer see him clearly. Silas Mercer was waiting at a relay station 6 miles down the south road. He was standing outside when they brought her in, and he watched her dismount with an expression of such complete, assured satisfaction that she wanted to hit him with something heavy. "Evelyn," he said, "you look terrible." "I've been running from your hired men for a week," she said. "What's your excuse?" His expression did not change. Almost nothing ever changed it. "Where are the documents?" "What documents?" "The ones Thomas left with Margaret Holt, the ones you retrieved." He said it with the unhurried patience of someone who already knew the answer and was simply waiting for her to arrive at it. "I know you went to Margaret. I know you have the documents. I want them." "Then you want something you're not going to get," Evelyn said. Silas studied her. Then he did something she had not expected. He sat down. He gestured to the chair across from him. She did not take it. He shrugged. "Let me explain your situation," he said. "You left Red Hollow abandoning the terms of your husband's estate. You have been traveling with a man who has a documented history of interfering with lawful property transfers. You have visited the home of a known agitator in Helena, and you have been formally accused of theft." He folded his hands. "Taken together, these facts paint a particular picture to a court of law." "A fraudulent court," Evelyn said. "All courts have a degree of—" He paused, choosing the word carefully, "flexibility. particularly when the evidence is properly presented by properly compensated attorneys. You're going to try to buy the federal circuit, Evelyn said. I'm going to ensure the case is understood correctly, Silas said, which is easier when the opposing party is not present to complicate things. He looked at her steadily. The marriage goes forward in Red Hollow, in 3 days. If you cooperate, the theft accusations disappear. The farm stays in the family. Your life continues comfortably with resources you cannot currently imagine. He paused. If you don't cooperate, the theft charges stand, the farm transfers to me anyway, and you face legal proceedings that will occupy the next 3 years of your life and cost you every cent Thomas left you. The room was quiet. Evelyn looked at Silas Mercer. She looked at him the way she had looked at the account books that night by the fire, not at the surface, but at the pattern beneath it. The structure of what he was really saying. He did not know the documents were gone. He did not know Rowan had them. He did not know about Catherine Reeves's letter or about Judge Pell's early arrival. He thought he was closing a trap that still had all its pieces in place. I need to think, she said. Silas nodded. He had expected this. He believed she was calculating odds. You have until morning. Then I'll think until morning. They put her in the back room of the relay station, which locked from the outside, but had a window that faced north. And Evelyn sat on the narrow cot and watched the dark and thought about Rowan riding hard toward Helena with the documents inside his coat, and she counted hours. Morning came. Silas came with it. Well, he said. Evelyn stood up. She had not slept, but she felt clear in the particular way that absolute certainty makes everything clear. I'll cooperate, she said. Something in Silas's expression shifted. Satisfied. Vindicated. He had always believed she understood now that everyone eventually cooperated, that it was only a matter of applying the right pressure in the right sequence. He had built his entire life on that belief. Wise, he said. I want it in writing, she said. The terms you mentioned, the charges dropped, the farm acknowledged as mine. In writing before I go anywhere. He considered this. That's reasonable. I'll need your attorney to draft it. Harlan Cross is... Not Cross, she said. Cross works for you. I want an independent attorney. Silas's eyes narrowed slightly. In Red Hollow, independent is... In Millhaven, Evelyn said. There's a woman there who does business contracts. I want her to draft it. The name hung in the air between them. She watched his face for a reaction, any flicker of recognition, and she saw it just barely, just the smallest tightening around his eyes, and she knew that he knew Catherine Reeves's name. He knew it, and it cautioned him, and the caution told her everything. That can be arranged, he said carefully. Then we go to Millhaven, she said. She needed Silas in Millhaven. She needed him present, documented, making agreements in front of witnesses, while somewhere in Helena, Rowan Cade was laying the actual case before a federal judge who had arrived 2 days ahead of schedule and had a letter of introduction from a woman he trusted. She needed to buy exactly enough time. Not much, just enough. Silas rode with her himself with 2 men alongside them, and he was quiet for most of the journey, which told her he was thinking. He was a man who thought carefully when he sensed the edges of a situation he could not fully see. She kept her expression neutral and said nothing and counted miles. Catherine Reeves was in her shop when they arrived. She looked at Evelyn. She looked at Silas Mercer. Her face showed nothing except the professional courtesy of a businesswoman receiving potential clients, and Evelyn felt a rush of something close to fierce gratitude for this woman she had known 3 days. Mr. Mercer, Catherine said, what can I do for you? I need a simple business contract drafted, Silas said. He looked around the shop with the habitual assessment of a man pricing everything. Mrs. Mercer and I are coming to an agreement regarding the Mercer estate. We want it documented independently. Of course, Catherine said. Please sit down. She went to her writing desk. She took out paper. She dipped her pen. Now, what are the terms? Silas began to speak, and Catherine Reeves wrote every word down in her careful, legible hand, and a man Evelyn had not seen when she walked in. a quiet man in a dark coat near the window who had arrived in Millhaven that morning on a fast horse from Helena, wrote them down too in a different notebook as a federal witness to everything Silas Mercer said. Evelyn sat across from Silas and watched him walk into it step by step, and she kept her face still and her hands folded, and she waited. The man near the window looked up once and caught her eye and gave a small, precise nod. Rowan had made it. The documents were filed. Judge Pell had read them. And Silas Mercer was sitting in a room in Millhaven in front of a federal witness outlining an arrangement that assumed a fraudulent will, a forged deed, and a coerced agreement were legally sound, all of which a federal court had already been presented evidence to the contrary. Silas had built his empire on the certainty that no one would ever find a court he didn't own. He had forgotten that the territory was large and that some judges rode fast. The federal witness near the window stood up. His name was Deputy Marshal Thomas Greer, and he had ridden from Helena through the night with Judge Pell's written authorization folded in his breast pocket, and the specific instruction to observe document and, if necessary, detain. He was a compact man with a quiet authority that filled the room the moment he rose from his chair, and Silas Mercer's eyes went to him with the instinctive alertness of a man who recognized danger before he understood its shape. "What is this?" Silas said. Not a question. The flat, controlled tone of a man buying time to think. "Deputy Marshal Thomas Greer," the man said. "Federal Circuit Judge Arthur Pell presiding." He placed his notebook on the table with the deliberate care of someone who understood the weight of what was written in it. "Mr. Mercer, I have spent the last 20 minutes listening to you describe an arrangement premised on a will and a property deed that a federal court has already received substantial evidence to consider fraudulent." He looked at Silas with the steady, impersonal gaze of a man doing a job he had done many times. "I am placing you under federal notice of inquiry. You are not being arrested at this time, but you are being asked to accompany me to Helena to answer questions before Judge Pell." Silas did not move for a long moment. His two men were behind him. Greer was in front of him. Catherine Reeves sat at her writing desk with her pen still in her hand and her expression perfectly composed. And Evelyn Harper. Evelyn Mercer sat across the table from him and looked at him with the clear, unwavering gaze of a woman who had spent 9 days being chased and threatened and cold and afraid and had not broken once. "You planned this," Silas said to her. "You planned yours for 4 years, she said. "I had 9 days. I think that says something about the difference between us." Something moved behind his eyes. Something she had never seen there before. Not anger, not calculation, but the beginning of genuine disbelief. He had been so certain, so completely certain, that the architecture of his power, the judges, the sheriffs, the bank accounts, the lawyers, was impenetrable. He had never genuinely entertained the possibility that she might find a door he had forgotten to lock. "My attorneys will have this dismissed within the week," he said. "Your attorneys are welcome to try," Deputy Marshal Greer said pleasantly. "Judge Pell is looking forward to meeting them." They took Silas out of Catherine Reeves's shop and into the cold Millhaven morning, and his two men rode behind him because there was nothing else they could do, and Catherine stood in her doorway and watched them go, with her arms crossed and an expression that was not quite a smile, but was close to the satisfaction of a woman who had been patient for a very long time. Evelyn stood beside her. "Is it over?" Evelyn asked. "The hard part is over," Catherine said. "The legal part takes longer, but the hard part," she glanced at Evelyn, "that part, yes. You are done running." Rowan arrived in Millhaven 2 hours later, having ridden back from Helena the moment Greer confirmed the notice of inquiry was in motion. He came through Catherine's back door and stopped when he saw Evelyn sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a stillness that was different from any stillness he had seen in her before. Not the stillness of someone bracing for what came next, the stillness of someone who had finally been allowed to stop. He stood in the doorway and looked at her. "It's done," she said. "I know," he said. Greer sent word. He took his hat off. He looked like a man who had been riding hard for 3 days and had not fully accepted yet that the riding was finished. "You all right?" I don't know, she said honestly. Ask me again in a week. He sat down across from her. Catherine quietly found something to do in the other room. The sworn statement was what did it, Rowan said. Thomas's notarized statement. Pell read it twice. He read the letters between Silas and Cross. He compared the deed dates. He set his hat on the table. He said, and I'm quoting, that it was one of the most thoroughly documented cases of estate fraud he had seen in 20 years on the circuit. Thomas did that, Evelyn said. All of it. While he was dying. Yes, ma'am. She looked at her coffee. He was protecting me. The whole time I thought he was just letting go, getting ready to go, but he was building something, right up until he couldn't anymore. Rowan was quiet. He had the good sense and the good heart to understand when words were not the thing that was needed. I want to go back to Red Hollow, Evelyn said. He looked up. The case. Not for the case. The attorneys can handle the filings. Margaret and Catherine know what to do. I want to go back once, just once, to the farm. He studied her face for a moment. When? Tomorrow, she said. One day. I want to stand on that land one more time before whatever comes next. I'll ride with you. She looked at him. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said simply, and picked up his coffee. They rode into Red Hollow the following afternoon, and the town felt different in the way that places feel different when the thing that gave them their particular weight has been removed. Silas Mercer's absence was physical. The sheriff's office had its door closed, and a handwritten notice posted on it that said, "Temporarily closed," in Walt Briggs's cramped handwriting, which told Evelyn that word had traveled faster than she expected, and that Walt Briggs had made the practical decision to be unavailable until the situation clarified itself. The farm was as she had left it, except for the barn, which was a blackened skeleton against the gray winter sky. Everything else stood: the house, the fencing, the equipment shed, the cattle, still in the far pasture, because Silas's workers had not bothered to move them, and they were too sensible to go anywhere in this cold. She walked through the house alone. Rowan waited outside. She went through every room, and she touched the things that were Thomas's, his coat still hanging on the peg by the door, the cup he used for his evening coffee, the Bible he kept beside the bed, with the dates of their marriage, and the names of his parents written inside the cover in his careful hand. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. She did not cry. She had thought she might. But what she felt was not grief anymore, not exactly. It was something heavier and quieter than grief. It was gratitude. For the 9 years. For the good that had existed inside the difficult. For a man who in the end had loved her the only way he knew how, not with declarations or grand gestures, but with preparation. With the careful, stubborn work of making sure she would be all right after he was gone. Thank you, Thomas, she said to the empty room. Then she got up and put on her coat and walked back outside. She sold the farm 6 weeks later, after the federal proceedings had confirmed the fraudulent deed null and void, and the original estate restored fully to her name. She sold it to Hector Ruiz, her former farmhand, at a price considerably below market value, with a handshake and the quiet understanding between two people that what passed between them was fair. Hector stood holding the deed with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life, not just gratitude, but a kind of stunned dignity, the look of a man who had spent his whole life being told the good things were not for people like him. You didn't have to do this, Mrs. Mercer, he said. I know, she said. That's why I did it. She and Rowan left Montana in early spring when the passes were clear enough to travel without misery. They took the stage west, then the rail where the rail existed, and they arrived in San Francisco on a morning in April, when the bay was silver bright and the air smelled like salt and possibilities and all the things that the frozen plains of Montana had never quite offered. It was the first morning in longer than she could remember that she woke up without counting threats. She rented a small shop on a side street in the commercial district, paid 2 months in advance with Thomas's money, and spent 3 weeks arranging it exactly as she wanted it. The sign above the door read, E. Clark Fine Tailoring and Alterations. She used her maiden name deliberately for the same reason a person opens a window after a long winter, because the air it let in was different. Her first customer came through the door on a Tuesday morning asking for a hem adjustment, and Evelyn worked with a focused, quiet pleasure that she had not felt in anything for months. And when the woman left, satisfied and paid, Evelyn stood in her shop alone and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for as long as she could remember. She was not waiting for anything. She was not afraid of anything. She was simply here in a place she had chosen, doing work she was good at. Rowan found honest work at a freight operation near the docks. The kind of steady physical labor that suited a man who thought clearly when his hands were busy. He rented a room 4 streets away. He came to her shop on Sunday afternoons, and she made coffee, and they talked about unremarkable things, the neighborhood, the weather, the customers, and the remarkable thing about it was how natural it was. How little performance was required. How completely 2 people could simply be in the same room without either one of them needing to explain why. One Sunday in autumn, he came in and sat down and said, without looking at her directly, "I've been thinking." "About what?" she said. "About whether I should stop renting that room 4 streets away." She poured the coffee. "That depends on what you're proposing instead." "I reckon," he said carefully, "I'm proposing that 4 streets is too far." She set the cup in front of him and looked at him for a moment. The man who had ridden through a winter night to pull horses out of a burning barn for a woman he had never met. The man who had carried documents through hostile territory and knocked a spy unconscious in the dark, and stood between her and 4 riders on an open road, and said without hesitation, "This became my problem." The man who had never once in 9 days of difficulty asked for anything in return. "I reckon," she said, "that 4 streets is too far." He looked up. Something in his face relaxed that she had not realized until that moment had been held tight for a long time. "Well then," he said. "Well then," she agreed. The legal proceedings against Silas Mercer concluded in the summer 2 years after Evelyn had walked out of Red Hollow in the middle of the night. Judge Pell's court found the will fraudulent, the deed invalid, and the orchestrated financial pressure on Thomas Mercer's estate a deliberate and documented act of estate fraud. Harlan Cross surrendered his law license and moved to Oregon under a different name. Walt Briggs resigned as sheriff and was not replaced with anyone Silas Mercer had paid for. 3 territorial judges who had been working within Silas's sphere of influence faced separate inquiries of their own, and Silas Mercer, stripped of the legal protections his money had always purchased, stripped of the sheriff and the judge and the narrative he had controlled for 30 years, found himself a large man in a suddenly small world. He contested the rulings through 4 attorneys over 18 months and lost every time. He died in a hotel room in Helena in the winter of his 67th year, attended by no one remembered for nothing good. Evelyn read the notice of his death in a San Francisco paper on a Thursday morning and folded it neatly and set it aside and went back to work. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel much of anything, actually. It was a small final note at the end of a chapter she had already finished reading. The Clark Foundation came 3 years after that, born out of a conversation she had with a young woman who came to her shop looking for alterations on a dress she clearly could not afford, and who, when Evelyn asked her gently about her situation, told a story that Evelyn recognized from the inside out. A dead husband. A family that wanted her land. No money, no training, no one who was willing to say out loud that she deserved better than what was being offered to her. Evelyn hired her on the spot. And then she hired the next one. And then she wrote to Catherine Reeves and to Margaret Holt, both of whom wrote back within the week, both of whom said yes before she had finished explaining. The foundation began in the back room of the tailor shop and grew into its own building within 2 years. It taught women to sew, to keep accounts, to read contracts, to understand what their names on a deed actually meant and how to protect it. It taught them that the law, imperfect and slow and often frustrating as it was, could be learned, and that women who understood it were harder to defraud than women who did not. It taught the thing that no one had taught Evelyn until she had been forced to learn it on the road in the cold, with a man she barely knew, and a set of documents she was willing to die for. That competence was not something given to you by the men who controlled your circumstances. It was something you built quietly and deliberately for exactly the moment when the controlled circumstances collapsed. Margaret Holt visited in the Foundation's second year and sat in Evelyn's office and looked around at the women working at the tables in the main room and said, "Thomas would not believe this." "Yes, he would," Evelyn said. "He always knew exactly who I was. He just didn't have time to see how far it went." She said it without sadness. She meant it without sadness. Thomas Mercer had loved her as well as he was able, and what he had left her was not grief. What he had left her was a fighting chance, and she had taken it with both hands and run. What Evelyn Clark built in San Francisco was not revenge for what Silas Mercer had tried to take from her. Revenge would have been small. Revenge would have been one woman's anger turned inward on itself. What she built was a door. A door that faced outward toward every woman who had been told she had no options, that her name meant nothing, that the men with the property and the lawyers and the judges held all the cards. The door said, "Come in. Learn what you need to know. Understand what you are worth. And then go build something they cannot take from you." Evelyn Clark was remembered long after the men who had tried to diminish her were forgotten, not because she had been rescued, not because she had been protected, not because someone powerful had decided to be kind to her. She was remembered because when they told her she had no choices, she found one. And when they told her she had nothing, she built everything. And when they told her a widow with 40 acres and $63 and a leather account book had no business standing in front of a federal judge, she stood there anyway, and she did not flinch, and she told the truth, and the truth was enough. Freedom, Evelyn had learned, was not given. It was built, defended, and handed forward so that the next woman who needed it would not have to start from nothing in the cold.